You're listening to TheESP, the European Skeptics Podcast, an independent weekly show set out to bring you news, interesting topics, and interviews with people mostly from Europe, building bridges and breaking down language barriers to show the world how active and awesome the skeptical movement is in the region. This is episode 505. I'm your host, András Pintér, and joining me for the show is my co-host, Pontus Böckman. Sia!
Hejsan, András! You're still on the move,
Hello.
I gather.
Yes, that's like my natural state of being, actually.
You're like a
on
shark.
move.
If you stop moving, then you die. Which is a myth, I know.
Yeah. No, actually, it's not that much of a myth.
Isn't it? I thought it was.
Because shark fins do not have that kind of movement. So they can't, paddle with it, like you would think with other... And their gills are not closed. So they have to have a constant flow of water through their gills so that it gets fresh water, fresh in oxygen. Mm-hmm. But with other fish, they can actually close their gills. And they can generate a vacuum so that they can suck water in. But sharks can't.
But can't they just park against the current somehow and let the natural current flow through the gills?
Yeah, they can. But so it doesn't have anything to do with them sinking. It's the lack of oxygenated water that,
And
that will not necessarily kill them, but deplete them of oxygen.
Okay, yeah. Good. All right, I'm glad we sorted that. Also, that we don't see paddling sharks very often. So, especially on this podcast, which has nothing to do with sharks at all.
No. And I'm happy to report that not even a Sharknado happened around here because I just arrived to Taipei, actually, in Taiwan. And a couple of hours ago, typhoon hit the southern shores of Taiwan, causing devastation in the Philippines a couple of days ago. But luckily it's just simple rain, so no sharks falling from the sky.
Okay, yet. We should say yet. You never know. You never know. We better get on with the show here before we get into that.
I wanted to bring something up that I know doesn't necessarily have much to do with Europe. Well, he did do his research in Europe, but probably all of our listeners heard that James Dewey Watson died.
I did.
He was an American, but he was at the age of 97. Wow, that is very impressive. And I read a couple of his obituaries, and it seems to have caused a lot of headache to many of them trying to write them because it's complicated, and with a good reason. And this is why I'd like to talk about this here, because on the one hand, he was a giant of science, but on the other hand, his case is a bit of a cautionary tale because it's a perfect case study in what we call noble disease, right? Yeah, just to mention his works, in 1953, he was just 24 years old. And Watson, an American, and his colleague in Cambridge, Francis Crick, cracked one of science's greatest mysteries, and the double helix structure of DNA was basically found. And it was a breakthrough that would reshape biology completely, medicine, our understanding of life itself. Brilliant work, and it was paradigm shifting. In 1962, Watson, Crick, and Maurice Wilkins, well, Rosalind Franklin should have been there as well, alongside them, but they shared the Nobel Prize in physiology or medicine. So his legacy seemed absolutely forming very nicely, like perfectly rolling in front of him. But this is where it gets interesting, because for decades after his great discovery, Watson's scientific achievements couldn't match his amazingly high start. He kept working on and publishing, but no comparable breakthroughs. But, well, what could compare to that? He wrote a few brilliant textbooks, though, but in the meantime, his public voice grew louder and louder, and increasingly that voice really wandered off from laboratory into a bit of a messy territory. And in the early 2000s, Watson started making a series of claims about race and intelligence, claiming without any evidence to corroborate his claims that there were genetic differences in intelligence between racial groups, or that black people were less intelligent than white people. What a douchebag. And he even went as far as saying that exposure to tropical sunlight affected not just skin color, but also sexual behavior. So crazy stuff. And obviously, these statements were not based on any kind of science, not to speak about rigorous science. And they were based on racist pseudoscience, which was dressed up in the language of genetics. So that's what really caused an outcry. And he sometimes apologized, but then he went back on television and reiterated the same views. So it was ridiculous. It went too far. So even Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, where he had spent most of his career, eventually severed all ties with him. And but we know a couple of examples of the noble disease, don't we?
Oh yeah,
like
Linus
just
Pauling.
to mention some Linus Pauling, but to mention a couple of European ones, the Dutch biologist Nicolaas Tinbergen, for example. He was one of the founders of modern ethology, but he promoted potentially harmful but definitely unsubstantiated ideas as to how to treat autism. We all remember when the French Nobel laureate Luc Montagnier, who discovered HIV, he promoted the idea that the water could have memory.
Yes.
And that DNA could teleport through electromagnetic waves. Ridiculous stuff. It's interesting why it happens.
Yeah.
Because science and someone who's science-minded should not make these mistakes, right?
No, I think so. But it's something with if people get too much hubris, people are being lauded for so much. They are fantastic. Everybody are so impressed with them.
Yeah.
Then they start to think that every thought they have is a brilliant idea, and they forget to test that, and that happens a lot, unfortunately.
Yeah, come on. You've been right, spectacularly right once.
Yes.
But it gets you such an ego boost that
right.
you feel like everything you do is gold, is pure gold. And no matter what you say, you're going to be right. But no, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
It's weird.
It's weird, yeah.
But he was really a giant of science.
Yeah, he was.
We have to admit that.
Yeah, I'd like to point out one thing. And I mean, they were douchebags for not recognizing Rosalind Franklin enough in their discovery. Yeah. However, she could never have gotten the Nobel Prize that year because she was already dead. And you can only get it if you are still alive. So she died 4 years before Watson and Crick got the Nobel Prize. And people forget that sometimes. Yeah. She should get more recognition, but she couldn't have gotten the Nobel Prize.
That's true. Yeah, Thanks for that comment. It's very important to clarify that, But she did not get that recognition even when she was still alive. So she didn't get that much attention at conferences, papers and stuff. So that was pretty difficult for her, I'm pretty sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. Conferences, you mentioned conferences, right? We like to go to conferences.
Oh, absolutely. Invite us.
We talked about that quite a lot, actually. And we're going to one big one next year, which we will not mention more today. But there are a lot of conferences going around, and you've been around as well, Anders, traveled a lot. Have you ever been to East Grinstead? Or East Grinstead? This is in the UK, so it's probably pronounced Leicester or something, but it's spelled East Grinstead. Have you been there? No? No. It seems like a nice town, about halfway between London and Brighton. And anyway, there was a huge conference there last week. 7,000 people, I've heard, gathering from all over the world to socialize with like-minded people. And that's very nice. We like to do that ourselves. Mm-hmm. Do you know what kind of a conference that was?
I don't, but I fear what the answer might be.
Well, if I say that Tom Cruise was there.
Oh, okay, Scientology?
Yeah, it was Scientology. So
that was easy.
Yeah. So I'm amazed that I've almost written Scientology off. I know you shouldn't do that, but it's such a ridiculous thing. There's been so much backlash against it. So it's easy to forget that they are still going. It's a huge organization. Now, we have to take that number, 7,000 people, with a grain of salt, because they usually inflate their numbers. They have claimed several times that they have at least 1 million and maybe millions of followers around the world. But independent estimates land at around 20,000 members, 20 to 30,000. Okay. So that's a big difference. And I looked up the census data for England and Wales. And from 2011, the number of people claiming to follow Scientology have fallen from 2,400 to 1,800. So If there were 7,000 people in East Grinstead last week, a lot of them came from outside of the country. But I guess
probably
Tom Cruise is not from UK. Anyway, they are going down. So if you go by the England and Wales numbers, they have lost 24% in 10 years. And I hope that trend continues, but we never know. It's a ridiculous thing.
Wasn't it like a fan gathering for Tom Cruise fans?
Could be. Like, I mean, if it wasn't for him, maybe they would have...
Nobody would have showed up.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Apparently, they have a big thing there in East Grinstead. A mansion or so that they have bought a long time ago. And they have...
the church?
Yeah, the church has, yes. So I don't know if there's a yearly conference specifically there, but from what I read also, what's his face? John Travolta has been there a couple of times as well. So, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. Wow.
So don't go to that conference. Go to the other conferences, the ones that we organize and support. They are much better. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, they are. More on that when we have updates and news. Yes. Well, wait a couple of months. You will find out everything about it. But it's going to be big. It's going to be huge. And it was one of those huge conferences that we like to talk about this, that we met Susan Gerbic. She's amazing. She's been a great supporter of our work. And she did it once again. I'd like to extend our thanks to Susan big time, because there is quite a lengthy and very detailed article about basically the history of the last 500 episodes of the European Skeptics podcast and what happened around that on the Skeptical Inquirer, no less. So that is quite... I feel very honored. So thank you, Susan.
Thank you very much. We will absolutely link to that article. Go read it. It's not...
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean,
of course.
It's very, very good. And it was on the occasion of our 500th episode, which we live streamed with a number of guests, including Susan.
Yeah, absolutely. She did her research.
Yeah.
Man. I mean, quite a detailed story. So it might be possible to update our Wikipedia article as well. Actually, she has already issued the call for that in the community of Guerrilla Skepticism on Wikipedia.
That's very good.
But obviously, it wouldn't be correct if I did it. So I should not do that. So we're waiting for someone else. So
Absolutely.
Thank you. And we love doing this. And without her and the support of the community as a whole, we wouldn't have been able to keep this up for this long. We've been at it for 10 years. Actually, sometime around this date is our 10 years anniversary.
In a week, I think.
Right? So,
in a week, it will be 10 years.
Next week.
Next week, yeah.
Oof, God, we haven't changed a bit.
No.
We
haven't learned a thing either.
No, that's much more of an issue, yes. But anyhow, thanks everyone, and please read and share the article. That can help us a great deal. By the way, you can help us in other ways too. So there are podcast applications that have like comment sections, and you can leave reviews. That is great help. That helps the algorithms make people find us. So that is very useful if you can do that. Or if you can even spare a couple of dollars or euros or forints or patakas or whatever.
I don't know what that last was, but yes, you can do that.
That's the currency of Macau.
Okay.
Pataka.
I don't think we have any of those yet, but we're looking forward to that. And if you want to contribute like that, the place is patreon.com/TheESP. And I think most people know how that works. You select the level, or you devise your own level, that's fine. And you can make recurring micro payments to us. That helps a lot.
Yeah. And by the way, if there are any listeners from Taiwan, I would be thrilled to meet up with you. So please get in touch. This will go out on Friday, so you will still have time to get in touch with me at ondrash@theesp.eu. So drop me an email and we can get in touch and like meet up for a tea, probably. That's the most
green
authentic
tea. Yeah,
thing
green
to do
tea
here.
is what I drink.
Yeah, green tea or oolong tea is what's really big here in Taiwan. But we have not an oolong, but a long episode to produce. So why don't we turn on to that? And the first part of the episode, after the initial banter, is This Week in Skeptical History, also known as TWISH. This week, I'd like to commemorate something that is very topical these days, and I consider it a real milestone in the fight against diseases. On the 14th of November, 1888, almost a century and a half ago, the doors of the Institut Pasteur opened in Paris. Paris.
With that exact accent, that's how they talk there.
Okay.
So before we lose all our French-speaking listeners, this is a joke. Sorry, no disrespect.
What joke are you talking about? No. It's I like trying to do accents, and I'm very bad at it, and I admit it, and I am so sorry. But getting back to the Institut Pasteur, which is the Pasteur Institute, obviously. So you could say that great, but why is it so important? It's a research facility. Come on, there are lots of those. But it represented one of the first institutionalizations of a radical new idea, that science and rigorous experimentation and evidence-based medicine could really triumph over infectious disease, because it's not just coming out of the air, as it was previously thought before Louis Pasteur, that is. So the Institute's founder, Louis Pasteur, had spent decades fighting on a really uphill battle against entrenched medical dogma, the spontaneous generation of disease, which was, ridiculous as it sounds now, back in the day, it probably made much more sense, and a lot of people really got stuck in the idea. But his discoveries really challenged everything that the medical establishment thought it knew. The germ theory of disease, the idea that invisible organisms cause illness, well, invisible because they're so small, and that was for a while considered radical, almost heretical even. But no matter how much resistance Pasteur faced, he persevered. And through careful, meticulous experimentation, he proved his doubters and naysayers wrong. And in 1881, Pasteur conducted his legendary public experiment near the town of Pouilly-le-Fort. He vaccinated 70 farm animals against anthrax, sheep, actually, then exposed them all to the deadly disease itself. So inoculated them with live bacteria.
Wow.
And all the vaccinated animals survived, while all the unvaccinated ones died. It was really a masterclass in scientific proof, because it was witnessed by the agricultural community and the press as well. There were reports on it. So this wasn't just a theory anymore. It was demonstrable, replicable fact that vaccination works. Following the triumph, Pasteur turned his attention to rabies as well, developing a successful rabies vaccine. Absolutely mind-blowingly successful events. And he developed a bit of a reputation. And from the underdog, he really became a bit of a star. That's the basis for the Institute to come alive. It opened 3 years later, 3 years after the successful rabies vaccine. It really embodied Pasteur's vision of how science should work. It became a center for both basic research and practical application, a place where scientists didn't just understand disease, they could develop solutions. But over the following decades, the Pasteur Institute became one of the world's great biomedical centers, with lots of subsidiaries all over the place. Its researchers developed vaccines against tuberculosis, the BCG vaccine that we all know and benefit from, still used worldwide actually. They created vaccines for diphtheria, tetanus, yellow fever, and poliomyelitis as well. In 1985, the Institute developed the first vaccine ever produced by genetic engineering, the hepatitis B vaccine. And, moreover, 10 Nobel Prizes have been awarded to the scientists working at the Institute. Wow, so that's a pretty prestigious institute, isn't it?
Yes, and they haven't gotten the Nobel Prize disease yet, I think. Or have they?
Not that I know
Not the Institute, anyway.
Of those 10 Nobel Prizes, no. But here's what really strikes me most painfully as I look at the history of the Pasteur Institute in the year 2025, because we seem to be living through a moment that looks alarmingly like that of Pasteur's initial time of his career. Today, we face not just disease, but a growing movement against vaccines. Not based on science, but rather all kinds of beliefs. Just like the doubts that Pasteur had to deal with in the 1880s, now scientists have to prove things, but no matter how much actual scientific evidence exists to their efficacy and safety, the anti-vaccination sentiment is spreading. And we've seen measles outbreaks return to countries where it had been or supposed to have been eliminated. We've seen whooping cough resurge in some countries. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, vaccine hesitancy became a matter of literally life and death. And we have 150 years of evidence showing that vaccines fucking work. And there are conspiracy theories, misinformation, and political manipulation that sows doubt where science has shown absolute clarity. So I wonder, what would Pasteur make of this? He was willing to risk his reputation. He endured ridicule and opposition, and he proved his point through evidence rather than rhetorics. What would he think of a society that had access to all his discoveries, all the subsequent medical breakthroughs, yet still chooses to ignore all that and choose to follow those that are absolutely clueless?
I guess he would feel. I guess he would feel like the rest of us, pretty disappointed in humanity.
Probably even more. I mean, but it's so good to see that the Pasteur Institute continues his legacy, continues to do amazing work. And it's really leading research into emerging diseases. The COVID-19 pandemic, it was among the first to isolate and sequence the coronavirus genome. It's currently advancing mRNA vaccine technology globally. It's collaborating with research centers worldwide to combat all kinds of infectious diseases that threaten us still. And among actual scientists, it's an institution regarded with high esteem. Yeah. The challenge is not necessarily developing better vaccines, because they are working on it, it's happening. But the challenge also of a society that increasingly distrusts expertise, evidence, and scientific institutions themselves. So, the Pasteur Institute, founded on the 14th, well, actually, it was launched on the 14th of November 1888. It reminds us that the fight for science isn't just fought in laboratories. It's fought in public discourse. It's fought in education. We fight it in how we communicate uncertainty and evidence. And Pasteur succeeded because he could prove his point. Today, we need to do the same, but it's not enough. Not just as scientists, but as citizens committed to the truth, we need to communicate all that, because there are much more platforms to do so. So here's to the Pasteur Institute and its anniversary.
Yeah.
Yay. And that brings us to finding out what's been going on in Europe in the last week or so.
Well, for one thing, the NHS in the UK is seeing a new trend. More and more men are seeking help because they say that they are suffering from low testosterone levels. So, what's going on? New epidemic on the way? What's happening? Hospital specialists say that they are seeing growing numbers of men who've had private blood tests, often promoted on social media. So now we're getting closer to the truth. And they have been told now that they need more testosterone, right? So this is a quote from Professor Channa Jayasena of Imperial College London, who is chair of the Society for Endocrinology Andrology Network. So, quote, "At the national meeting, we asked 300 endocrinologists across the UK. Everyone is seeing patients from these clinics every week," he said. "They are filling our clinics." End quote. He goes on to say that it's really affecting NHS care, and they don't know how to deal with this onslaught of people, really. And as you've probably guessed already, this is coming from misinformation on social media, especially on TikTok. What is promoted here is something called TRT, testosterone replacement therapy. It's all about playing on men's insecurity and getting them to feel that they are not manly enough, and that as a real man, you will strive to get as high a testosterone level as is humanly possible. Nonsense, of course. Well, I should say that TRT is a legitimate treatment in certain cases when there's something the matter with you. But it's not something that is beneficial for most people. But many seem very happy to pay thousands of pounds to private clinics to have this TRT. And the only way to create this demand is to do it through social media, because advertising prescription drugs in the UK is illegal. But a number of TikTok influencers are collaborating with private medical clinics to advertise blood tests. And that's legal to do. And then when you get the results, the influencers can more than hint that if your levels are not absolutely at the top, you need some therapy. And it's not just a financial issue, paying thousands of pounds for something that you don't need. Taking testosterone when it's not needed can actually cause infertility. It suppresses the testicular and hormone signals from the brain needed for the testicles to work properly. So as Jayasena says, giving this concoction of other drugs in these private clinics stops the body from working in the proper way. And this is the same problem that can happen if you use anabolic steroids. So obviously this is a terrible idea, and I guess our listeners are smart enough not to take medical advice from TikTok or other social media, but enough people are doing that it's causing a problem even for the NHS.
Well, speaking of British institutions and media...
Where are you going there? Yeah,
I think we've all heard that there is really a major institutional crisis that seems to be happening at the BBC. So the BBC, if someone doesn't know, is Britain's publicly funded broadcaster and a model for public service journalism worldwide for many. And also to many who do any kind of content production, its standards have long been thought very highly of. And I include myself among these people. I've certainly been a bit of a fan, to be honest, of the BBC since my childhood. But I'm not saying that they are beyond criticism. They have been doing doubtable things, especially when there's a false balance kind of narrative that they often push for in topics of science. Never mind. So we've criticized the BBC before, but the events of last week are different. They raise serious questions about the Beeb's editorial standards. But not only that, but even institutional independence and the potential influence of powerful actors on media gatekeepers. So this crisis centers on a documentary by the BBC's flagship investigative program, Panorama, which aired in October 2024. Just days before the American presidential election. And the documentary presented a misleading edit of a speech that Donald Trump delivered on January 6, 2021, the day of the Capitol riot that we probably all remember, when people were actually hurt. The editing created a false impression that Trump had directly incited violence. Well, we don't know whether it was actually his intention, but the original statements did not reflect that. So Trump said two separate statements, made roughly an hour apart. First, he said, "We're going to walk down to the Capitol and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women." Later, he said, "We fight like hell, and if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore." The Panorama program spliced these quotes together to make it appear Trump has said, "We're going to walk down to the Capitol and I'll be there with you and we fight. We fight like hell." So this added significantly altered the meaning, removing Trump's call for peaceful support and making it appear he'd explicitly encouraged violence. Now, for months, the BBC took no corrective action whatsoever. And only after the Telegraph newspaper published a leaked internal memo in early November did the corporation acknowledge the error at all. The memo came from Michael Prescott, an independent advisor to the BBC's Editorial Standards Committee. His 39-page dossier revealed what he described as systemic problems and inaction by BBC leadership. Now, the political and legal pressure became overwhelming. So on Sunday, November the 9th, Tim Davie, the BBC's Director General, and Deborah Turness, the corporation's head of news, both resigned. Davie stated he took ultimate responsibility for the corporation's mistake, while Turner said the controversy had reached a stage where it was causing damage to the BBC. And I think that is an understatement, because the BBC's chairman, Samit Shah, subsequently apologized for what he termed an error of judgment, but I think that was an understatement too. Within days, Trump's legal team delivered a devastating message: retract the allegations and compensate Trump for harm or face $1 billion defamation lawsuit. Now, I don't want to go into that and how it is currently, what the state of that is, but I think from a skeptical point of view, we need to examine this a little further. So Prescott's memo contains far more than criticism of the Trump edit, because he alleged systematic bias across multiple topics. These include claims that the BBC exhibited pro-transgender bias in its coverage of certain news, with what he described as, quote, effective censorship of gender-critical perspectives. He alleged one-sidedness in reporting on the Israel-Gaza conflict as well, claiming that the BBC minimized Israeli suffering to, quote-unquote, paint Israel as the aggressor. And to add to that, Prescott raised concerns about anti-Israel bias in the BBC's Arabic service as well. And these allegations definitely deserve scrutiny, right? But so does the source making them. So I'm not in favor of an ad hominem attack against anyone. And obviously, I need to take into account my little bit of bias towards the BBC. I mean, I'm positively biased towards the BBC. I have to admit that too. But this story becomes especially important for skeptics and critics of information manipulation, I think, because the investigation by Byline Times has revealed that Michael Prescott is not the neutral auditor he was presented to be. Prescott is a managing director at Hanover Communications, a major British lobbying firm with long-standing Conservative Party ties. His clients include Oracle, Apple, Meta, and Paramount, powerful American technology and media corporations closely aligned with Donald Trump. Oracle is particularly significant in this because the company is owned by billionaire Larry Ellison, a Trump mega donor, actively assembling what analysts described as a pro-Trump media empire. And these corporations have direct financial interest in how technology, media regulation, and platform liability are reported, precisely the topics the BBC usually covers. There is more, because Prescott was apparently appointed to the BBC advisory position through the influence of Sir Robbie Gibb, a BBC board member and former communications chief under former Prime Minister Theresa May. Gibb is also a co-founder and early fundraiser for GB News. We have heard of that. I'm pretty sure many of our listeners have. A rival British broadcaster openly hostile to the BBC. And it was basically founded to challenge the BBC politically. And in March 2025, a GB News owner, Paul Marshall, described the BBC as a giant toad that should be broken up. So, by August, GB News had launched in the United States on Trump's Truth Social platform, featuring cabinet members of the Trump administration. So, this is getting a little deep, I think. But what we're witnessing appears to be a coordinated institutional attack on the BBC from multiple directions. American Trump-aligned corporate interests, politically aligned domestic actors within Britain, and media outlets designed to supplant the BBC. The weaponization of the Trump edit, which is a legitimate criticism that it deserves, we have to admit that, because it was just wrong to do that edit. But it looks like it may serve as a vehicle for dismantling or fundamentally altering a major independent news institution, because government funded it is, though. The editorial direction cannot be dictated by any sitting government. So that's the basic principle of how the BBC works. So this really raises critical questions for public discourse, I think.
Very interesting.
Can those powerful actors exploit even genuine editorial errors to undermine inconvenient institutions like the Beeb? How do we distinguish between legitimate accountability and orchestrated institutional capture? This is what blows my mind. This is why I love dealing with science instead, because that's so political. It's so impossible to see through clearly. And I'm fed up with that. And what happens to information ecosystems when public service broadcasters are stripped of their legitimacy, particularly during election times? So I don't know what to think of this, but it's really interesting how, if you start digging, you can find interesting connections in the background.
This is very dangerous because this is very sensitive, and also, I mean, for me, people who are neutral and try to be honest have that as a handicap, right? If they're attacked by people who are have no scruples and are used to lying and to spreading misinformation, it's very hard for an honest side to win an argument. And I agree that this edit was stupid in a way, because you don't have to ugly edit Donald Trump for him to sound bad.
No.
You don't have to.
No, absolutely not.
So manipulating his speech to make him seem even worse than he is unnecessary. And you shouldn't do it, of course. You should be honest in your reporting. No. But this may be an excuse to do a whole lot of damage to not just the BBC, but to publicly funded media in many countries.
Yeah, the BBC, for all its flaws, has for a century represented a model of public service journalism that influenced similar institutions all over the world, globally, really. So I don't know what to think of this, but there is a journalism professor, Julie Posetti, of City St. George's University of London, and she said to the Associated Press, and I quote, "This is an existential crisis for the BBC. In capitulating so quickly, it has sent a signal that it's relatively easy to cow the Beeb." She warned this is incredibly dangerous because we are in an increasingly polarized environment where the information ecosystem is basically completely and incredibly polluted. So we need those institutions that we can rely on, as you said as well. So please don't do that to the BBC.
Okay. I'm sure this is something we will come back to again and again. This story is just starting, unfortunately.
I'm sure of it too.
All right, so another topic, just a short one, but important. It shouldn't be too surprising, but we need to take every opportunity to fight the RFK Jr. misinformation nonsense. And as we know, RFK Jr. has blamed the increasing numbers of reported autism diagnoses on expectant mothers taking paracetamol or acetaminophen or Tylenol. According to Bobby Jr., taking paracetamol would increase the risk of the baby developing autism. We all know that this is not true, but just to make sure, there was an international study published in the BMJ on 10th of November, taking one more look at all the data that we have. So this was an umbrella review of systematic reviews, which means that they took a look at 9 systematic reviews that have been done, and they summarized all the underlying data into one big package, if you will. It looked not only at links to autism, but also to ADHD. And that was a bit complicated because several of the other systematic reviews had looked at the same original data, so they had to make sure that they didn't include the same data more than once in this umbrella review. Yeah. So, but they did probably a good job. They say they adjusted for 23% of the underlying studies that was duplicated in this whole thing. And the results, of course, were that the evidence do not point to any link between maternal paracetamol use and autism or ADHD in offspring. So when it comes to this subject, I think the general response from academia, from researchers and the mainstream media, at least here in Europe, have been pretty darn good to hold back against RFK Jr.'s blatant disinformation. Reactions have been quick, very measured, very factual. It all highlights what we already know, as well as is humanly possible, namely that Bobby Jr. is wrong on this one. I really hope that an overwhelming majority of expecting mothers still feel that it is safe to use paracetamol if they need to. It's not just safe. First of all, it's the only painkiller, fever-reducing drug we know is safe to take during pregnancy. And especially, having a fever is dangerous for the growing embryo fetus.
Exactly.
So ironically, as people have pointed out before, there actually seems to be a link between not taking paracetamol and autism. So it's the other way around. So, you don't want to have a high temperature during pregnancy because that may harm the baby developing in uterus. So hopefully the message is clear on this. I mean, I don't know how it is in America, how many people are listening to RFK Jr. Here in Europe, as far as I can see, everybody's saying, no, you're wrong. Bobby, you're wrong.
I don't know to what extent can we thank European media institutions for that. Well, we talked about the BBC, but there seems to be a troubling phenomenon growing so large that it's penetrating France's mainstream media landscape. So it looks like there is a systematic spread of climate misinformation. Mm-hmm. And this isn't just a social media problem, because we're used to that, unfortunately, but it's happening on televisions and radios that millions of French citizens trust for their news. So what's going on here? In the first quarter of 2025, researchers from Data for Good, Quota Climat, and Science Feedback conducted an unprecedented investigation to scan French television and radio news broadcast using artificial intelligence. So what they found was alarming. Roughly 10 cases of verified climate disinformation per week across France's major media outlets were spotted. Over the course of 8 months, researchers identified 529 separate instances of climate-related misinformation. That's more than one per day, hidden within what French citizens consider authoritative journalism and reliable source. What makes this particularly concerning for us, skeptics, is that 69% of French people trust television news as a reliable source of information, compared to just 29% who trust social media more. So this trust and the disparity in this trust means that misinformation embedded in mainstream broadcast carries significantly more weight than false claims spreading on TikTok or Facebook, right? Mm. The research identified clear patterns of who's responsible. Sud Radio emerged as the worst offender, accounting for nearly 1/3 of all detected climate disinformation. 40 cases out of 128 in the first quarter alone. Sud Radio, which reaches over 4.5 million monthly listeners, had already been formally warned by France's broadcasting regulator, ARCOM, for climate denial back in 2014. Yet the disinformation continues, apparently. There is CN News, the second most watched news channel in France. That was another major culprit. Despite being fined 20,000 euros in 2024 for climate misinformation, researchers found it continued broadcasting misleading narratives about climate science no matter what. Even BFM TV, one of France's largest news channels, violated its own editorial commitments to presenting controversial issues with honesty, airing segments containing unchecked misinformation. It's crucial to emphasize that these aren't fringe outlets. These are mainstream broadcasters with massive audiences, and they're systematically failing to verify climate claims before broadcast. What specific lies are being spread, you might ask? The research identified 2 dominant topics. One of them is regarding energy. It represented 50% of all disinformation cases. This targeted renewable energy sources like wind and solar power, with false claims that renewables are unreliable, more polluting than fossil fuels, or unnecessary given France's nuclear capacity. And these claims directly contradict scientific consensus because, well, the claim that it's more polluting than fossil fuels, it's just ridiculous. There is a bit of an investment, and that is regarding the carbon dioxide emissions as well. So the production of those comes with a bit of investment necessary, but then for the lifetime of it, it's still much better than fossil fuels. Mm. The other thing is mobility. You know, that's my pet topic, which accounted for 47% of cases, obviously with particular focus on electric vehicles. Broadcasters add claims that EVs are more polluting than petrol cars, battery production outweighs climate benefits, and that they don't work in real-world scenarios. Again, these directly contradict not only established scientific evidence, but everyday experiences of users of these cars as well. In 13% of cases, climate science itself was discredited, with outright denial that climate change exists or that humans cause it. 13% of the cases. Major news outlets are what we are talking about. And obviously, these claims have to be wrapped in conspiracy theories or some kind of political narratives. So researchers discovered that disinformation spikes coincided with elections, interestingly.
Imagine
policy rollouts and major political events. it seems to be strategic. Climate disinformation appears to be deliberately weaponized to manipulate public opinion and influence voting behavior during critical moments. It's not just bad journalism, it's political manipulation disguised as news. But I'd like to say that it's not all dark. Some French outlets demonstrated genuine editorial integrity. RFI, Radio France Internationale, they aired more climate-related content than any other outlet studied, yet researchers detected 0 instances of disinformation.
Well done.
Yeah, it was praised by the researchers for accurate, science-based reporting. Well done, good stuff. France Inter, France Culture, and Art were also flagged as watchdog channels, meaning they covered climate issues responsibly with verified, accurate information. These outlets prove that maintaining journalistic standards is entirely possible, even when covering complex scientific topics. So do that, please. And for critical thinkers and skeptics, I'd like to give you a couple of ideas as to how to deal with these situations when you come across these. First, diversify your sources. Don't rely on a single news outlet. Compare coverage across multiple sources, particularly comparing outlets that perform well, like RFI, with outlets that have shown patterns of misinformation. Secondly, follow the fact-checkers. There are lots of fact-checkers out there, organizations that provide expert verification of scientific claims, so when mainstream broadcasters make specific claims about renewable energy or electric vehicles, check them against peer-reviewed science and established scientific organizations. Thirdly, be alert to the political timing, because when climate-related stories spike around elections or policy announcements, apply extra scrutiny. Ask yourself who benefits from this narrative. That is just a general rule of thumb, actually, for skeptics anyway. Fourth, demand accountability. Despite Arcom's warning and the occasional fines that some of the news outlets get, Sud Radio continued spreading misinformation. So regulatory agencies need real informants' power, not just warnings that are ignored. So do that. And I find it alarming, but it's really good to see that there are those news outlets that we can really try and rely on. So keep them alive and afloat, please.
Okay, good. All right, so let's do some amateur psychology here. Not amateur, this is based on real data. There is a big interest in understanding online trolls and what motivates them. Psychologists want to understand the behavior and motivation of people who engage in destructive and mean comments, often under the protection of being anonymous online, right? Mm-hmm. A relatively new study, it was actually published in August, but it was in the news last week. It was published in the journal Behavior and Information Technology. They looked into the link between narcissism and trolling, which is something that has been surfacing before, especially in recent research. So let's start with some simple definitions then. Narcissism is a personality trait characterized by grandiose sense of self-importance, a need for admiration, and a sense of entitlement. See any politician close to you. Yeah. that part is not
ticks all the boxes.
That's last part is not part of the official definition. That was my comment, just to be clear.
Okay.
Okay, so then trolling, what is that? Well, in the context of social media, it is the act of posting inflammatory or provocative messages to intentionally upset others and disrupt online conversations. And this study wanted to test if 2 distinct types of envy could help explain an apparent link between narcissism and trolling, which they had found some basis for in other studies. But it also wanted to look if exposure to anti-social media content played a role in this link. So first let's define the 2 types of envy. The first type of envy is benign envy, which is a feeling that motivates a person to improve themselves to match somebody else, someone you admire, they do something good and you envy them, so you want to mimic and do what they are doing. That's not bad. Yeah. That's benign. The other kind of envy is malicious envy, and that involves hostility and a desire to see a more successful person brought down. So the researchers, they recruited 326 participants who completed a detailed online questionnaire designed to measure several psychological characteristics and their tendencies for both malicious and benign envy and their self-reported trolling behavior on social media. So, as seasoned skeptics, we react, of course, to the method of self-reporting because people, they report what they want to report. And even if they want to report something honestly, they may not be self-aware enough to correctly report on how they are as a person. And ironically, I don't know how you would stop anyone from trolling the study by lying on the questionnaire itself. So, caveats all around, but that was the methodology, and I guess we will have to go with that for now. And this is what they found. They found that benign envy did not correlate with narcissism. Malicious envy, on the other hand, seems to be a trait of narcissism, and that seems to trigger searching out antisocial media content, and that in turn seems to trigger trolling. So you have a direct link from malicious envy to narcissism to consuming ugly stuff online, and then to engage in trolling behavior yourself. Yeah, so they found a link. That's interesting. It wasn't very surprising, but it's nice to see that they have done this research. And now, of course, does this mean that we can happily and confidently call every internet troll malicious, envious, doom-scrolling narcissists? Well, maybe not.
Probably not.
This research does not claim that that's the only way you become a troll, an internet troll. But feeling malicious envy and being a narcissist doesn't help. So let's put it that way.
Okay. Things to avoid. Mind. Yeah. Okay, so thank you very much. That brings us to the end of the news round. And that means that we are about to find out who's been really wrong lately.
Yes. So part of skepticism is consumer protection, right?
Yes,
And
yes.
at the moment, we are heading for Black Friday, or as someone very clever, more clever than me, put it, Black Fraud Day. So consider this week's Really Wrong a consumer protection warning. Okay, here we go. So Black Friday, of course, is supposed to be the day for great deals and fantastic bargains. The history is that it's meant to get people in the US, primarily, off their asses after Thanksgiving Thursday and buy a lot of stuff. Perhaps maybe as a start for their Christmas shopping. The Friday is often a day off, I guess, if they have days off in the US, I'm not sure. But I'm sure some have.
It depends a lot on whether you work for the government or not. Especially recently.
They have had a very long bridge day, yes. 41 days, I think it was. Okay.
Oh, God.
Anyway, in normal cases, you may have a bridge day on the Friday there, and the shops want you to use that for shopping. And from the US, it has spread to a lot of other countries as well, even if these other countries are not typically celebrating Thanksgiving at all. But we can always do with some fancy shopping. Then Black Friday is often extended to the following Monday, often called Cyber Monday, or maybe even the full week afterwards. Then that week will become the Black Week or the Cyber Week or whatever. But there is a lot of cheating going on. And there are at least two common ways for this to happen. The first is that the shops, online or physical shops, a lot of it is online, but what they do is they raise the prices of certain products shortly before Black Friday, and then they return to the same base price on Black Friday, calling that a big rebate. This is not legal in many countries. In Sweden, for example, which I know more about, the rule is that you have to print the comparison price, and that comparison price has to be the average of the 30 days up until Black Friday. So that is so a little bit of a check there. Still, there are cases. Maybe, let's say, an IT shop raises the prices of not everything they have, but maybe they select 2 laptops. And they raise the price well before 30 days before Black Friday. That's not a big problem for them because they have lots of other computers and laptops that people can buy in the meanwhile. And these 2 will probably not sell as well because they are priced too high. But then when Black Friday comes, they reduce the price to the original price. And then it suddenly looks like those 2 laptops have become much cheaper than before. That thing happens. But there is even worse fraud happening on Black Friday than what I just described. Using AI, it's now very easy to create full, very convincing fake online stores that look very much like legitimate stores. And they can advertise fantastically low prices on hot products there, only to take your money and never deliver the goods, right?
Yeah.
So things to look out for are, of course, links in emails. Don't click those. Type in the legitimate URL instead, because sometimes it's just a totally different URL. Or sometimes they're sneaky and they've changed an O to a 0, so it looks legitimate, unless you really look at it. And of course, look out for stores that you haven't heard about before, because some of these AI-generated stores, they just appeared the day before, and they are not legitimate, they are not real stores. Another thing then to look out for is if they want you to pay by bank transfer rather than credit card, because then you are not as protected as a consumer.
Plus, because it's much more of a deliberate thing, probably. But there is another thing that in order for you to be able to accept card payments, you would need to have a contract with some of the payment platforms.
That's right,
which you don't have to have when you just do a direct bank transfer.
Correct. Yeah. Yet other things to look for is if there is an urgency in getting the deal. Claims, click now, in 10 minutes this deal will disappear. Only a few items left in stock. Act immediately to secure one. So don't fall for that. Safe shopping, everybody. Make sure that you keep track of what you buy. But I hope you make some good deals out there, but be careful. And remember that Black Friday scammers or Black Fraud Day scammers have now received this week's award for being really wrong.
Yeah, it was about time. I mean, in the last 10 days, they haven't gotten any, but it's gotten worse. So it was really about time. All right, thank you very much for that, Pontus.
Thanks a lot.
Hope everyone will try to be more cautious. But we are about to finish this week's episode, but to do that, we need a quote.
Yay!
And this week's quote comes from a Hungarian chemist, Professor Mihály Beck, who was a co-founder of the first Hungarian skeptical group called Society of the Respecters of Facts. Ooh. And he was also an author of several books on the contrast between science and pseudoscience. He was born on the 14th of November, by the way, 1929, and died on the 31st of July, 2017. I consider myself very, very lucky that I had the opportunity to meet him in person several times, actually. So, the quote itself is, "Science belongs to no one, so naturally, no one has the right to determine what is official and what is not. In science, the value of insights and discoveries is determined by independent verification, proof, and integration into the system of scientific knowledge. In pseudoscientific manipulations, it is precisely this independent verification, the satisfactory and scientifically rigorous proof of claims, that is lacking."
Yes, very true, very true. Reminds me a little bit of, I think maybe it was Ricky Gervais who said that. Maybe now I'm quoting somebody out of context here, just out of my head. But he said whoever it was, I think it was Ricky Gervais, who said that the difference between the Bible and science is that if you destroy all Bibles today, they are gone forever. But if you destroy all science books today, they will be back in a couple of thousand years because people will rediscover them. They are there. They are there to be found.
Oh, well, there are similar. Yeah, I remember that, and it was Ricky Gervais. But I don't think I've ever fully agreed with that.
Mm-hmm.
Not completely. And the reason why I'm saying that is because if you look through the literature, especially ancient literature or later stuff, ancient literature deals with a lot of phenomena, natural phenomena, the same way. I mean, there are patterns that come back all the time with literary works coming from different parts of the world. So when it comes to floodings, when it comes to the gods punishing the world, it's always the same kind of pattern. It's a thinking pattern, I think, really reflected by that. But I agree that the laws of nature and this discovery of the laws of nature would be the same in a way, because sooner or later you would have to come up with things that are absolutely independent of what you believe.
Yeah, but if you destroy all the Bibles and everybody forgets about it, nobody will invent Jesus Christ. They will invent somebody
Not
like
specifically.
him.
Somebody like him, yes.
But if you destroy all the science books, sooner or later somebody will isolate hydrogen as an element, for instance.
And discover the laws of gravity and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Fly to the moon or whatever. Yeah, all right.
Yeah. Fly me to the moon. Okay, but that really concludes this week's episode. So I'd like to thank you, Pontus.
Thank you very much.
For your continued efforts. Many, many thanks to our listeners as well for tuning in. Please keep doing so. And until next week, goodbye.
Hej då!
Vislat. This has been your ESP experience. The show is produced and recorded by TheESP.eu. Join us again next time, but until then, please send your feedback and comments to info@TheESP.eu. We would also love to hear your ideas and suggestions regarding topics, and if you have any skeptical news from any European country, we're always eager to hear about them. If you have an upcoming local event or an organization to promote, please don't hesitate to let us know, as we are more than happy to help. All music in the program was written and performed by Keisha J. Gray and George Robb and is used with their permission. Please check out our webpage for show notes and archive material at theesp.eu. Follow us on Blue Sky at theesp.bsky.social. Like us on Facebook or support our work on patreon.com/theesp. And don't forget to spread the word by sharing our content with others.
I don't know how you can believe.
Pretty prestigious institute, wasn't it? Or isn't it? So that's a pretty prestigious institute. That's a pretty prestigious institute, isn't it? Is delegitimized. Sorry. When a public service broadcaster is fucking hell, is stripped of his legitimacy.
Okay, that goes to the outtakes.
Okay.
And set.
Yeah.
Now it is a long. Okay. No, I've lost all confidence in the. So I give up even before I've tried it. And it all highlight. Type of envy is benign envy, and that involves hostility.
Hostility.
No, I'm sorry. No, I scrolled. I scrolled in my documents. I read along right.
What did I want to say? Yeah, close. Oh, sorry. It's getting ridiculously late. It's almost 1:30 in the morning. Whew.